Do you believe that some houses can remember their old owners, recognize the new ones, and only open their doors when you've truly earned the right to enter? It sounds impossible, yet across America, there are hundreds of so-called legacy houses, places people say still hold the breath and memory of those who came before, where every heir must pay a price far deeper than money. The story you're about to hear isn't just a legend. It's a reminder that sometimes the truest inheritance doesn't lie in a safe, but in the soul. Our story begins on a rainy night, in a small town tucked between the mountains and the mist. A woman, 8 months pregnant, drives alone into the woods to claim the strangest gift of her life. They call the place Willow Creek, a valley no map can guide you to, and one that reveals itself only to those who have been called by name. Some say the forest whispers after dark. Others swear they've seen a blue glow rising from the ground as if the earth itself were breathing. But what makes Willow Creek truly remarkable is not the land, but the women who have kept it alive for generations. They weren't witches. They weren't saints. They were simply women who understood that nature doesn't need to be owned, only listened to. And the last of their line was Sarah Blackwood. At 32, Sarah had lost almost everything: a broken marriage, a child soon to be born without a father, and a family name that carried more distance than pride. When the lawyer read her grandmother's will, everyone expected a share of wealth except her. And they were right. Sarah inherited nothing, except a crumbling cabin deep in the woods. No one knew that the cabin had been waiting for her, to unlock a door leading somewhere beyond this world. This isn't just a story about a house or a will. It's about the connection between people and the earth, about the power of memory. Some funerals aren't just for saying goodbye to the dead. They're for bringing hidden truths into the light. Truths the living never had the courage to face. That morning, rain drifted softly over a small town in northern Vermont. The maple leaves had turned deep crimson, and the church bell echoed against a grey sky. Sarah Blackwood stood beneath a black umbrella, watching the casket of her grandmother, Eleanor, the woman everyone once called the Forest Queen. No one came close to Sarah. Some people avoided her eyes. Others whispered, "Poor girl, she won't inherit a thing." They were right, at least, in the way they understood inheritance. The reading of the will took place that afternoon in the Blackwood family's old stone house. Portraits of solemn women lined the walls, their painted eyes following Sarah, cold and still. The family lawyer, Mr. Harrington, read aloud in a dry, practiced tone. "To my sons and daughters, the remaining estate shall be divided equally. To my granddaughter, Sarah Blackwood, I leave the cabin at Willow Creek and a small stipend for its care." Silence. Then came the laughter, sharp, mocking. "That shack," one aunt sneered. "Good Lord, she left her the Blackwood curse." Sarah said nothing. She simply looked at the iron key resting on the table, heavy, grey, its handle carved with a crescent moon. When everyone had left, she slipped it into her coat pocket and smiled. The quiet smile of someone who understands that some gifts only reveal their worth once you're brave enough to open them. That night, Sarah left town. Her old car rolled down roads carpeted with golden leaves. The moonlight glimmered on the worn map her grandmother had left behind, marked with a small tree and the words Willow Creek. She lowered the window, breathing in the damp scent of soil and pine, and whispered, "Grandma, if this is a curse, I'll find out what it means." Headlights cut through the fog. The road curved steeply toward a hidden valley, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, a faint blue light flickered between the trees, as if something had been waiting for her all this time. And that was where the story truly began. Night fell quickly over the mountain road. Sarah's car rolled beneath rows of maple trees, tires crunching on damp soil that smelled of pine. The headlights sliced through thin layers of mist, and the only sound left in the world was her heartbeat. She was leaving behind everything familiar and driving toward a place that didn't exist on any map. Every forest has its own language if you know how to listen. At the last gas station before the woods, an old man behind the counter squinted at her and said, "You're a Blackwood, aren't you? Heading to Willow Creek? Nobody's gone up there in years." He leaned closer, his voice low. "They say that forest recognizes who belongs to it. If you hear the wind calling your name, don't be afraid. Just answer." Sarah smiled politely and drove away, but something in his words felt true. And for Sarah, who had already lost everything, this was her one chance to begin again. At the final bend, the road opened into a fog-covered valley. There it was an old wooden cabin, quiet, patient, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Sarah stopped the engine. The wind carried the scent of herbs and distant water. She held the cold iron key in her hand, stepped onto the porch, and the door eased open. Warm air greeted her, wrapping around like an embrace. On the beam above the hearth, the firelight revealed carved words, "Verum in tenebris lucet." Truth shines in darkness. Sarah rested her hand on her belly and whispered, "Maybe. This is home." That was the moment she crossed the threshold, from the world she knew into the one that had been waiting for her all along. The moment Sarah crossed the threshold, the house exhaled warm, gentle, alive. There was no dust, no smell of damp wood, only pine and herbs, and a soft fire burning in the hearth, though no one had lit it. The cabin looked small from outside, but inside it felt open, safe, and strangely comforting. A steaming cup of tea sat on the table, blankets folded neatly, and a wooden cradle carved with the shape of a willow tree waited by the bed. She touched the cradle. The wood was warm, almost pulsing. She moved through the cabin, opening drawers and cupboards. On the kitchen shelf sat jars labelled in careful handwriting: rosemary, sage, lavender. Beside them lay a thick leather journal. On the cover, Eleanor Blackwood, Keeper's Journal. The first page read, "If you're reading this, then the house has accepted you. Let it teach you how to listen." The wind sighed through the walls, floorboards whispered underfoot, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt not alone. That night she sat by the fire, turning the pages filled with sketches, herbs, and cryptic notes. One line caught her eye: "When you are ready, the light will show you the way." Below it, a drawing, an oil lamp with a small star beside it. Sarah lifted the lamp from the table and lit the wick. The flame flickered, grew steady, and on the wall, a pattern appeared. A map glowing faintly in the firelight. She smiled, hand resting on her belly. "I'm ready, Grandma." And the light began to guide her deeper into the story. The lamp flickered softly as Sarah opened the old leather journal. The scent of ink and time filled the air. The handwriting was Eleanor's, strong, deliberate, full of purpose. "If you found this book, I'm gone. But the house would never open to someone unworthy. You are of the bloodline of keepers, and now the land remembers you." Between notes on herbs and sketches of roots and streams, she found folded letters, fragile yellowed, written by women who'd come before her. The first was dated 1932. Margaret Blackwood, the first keeper. "When I inherited this land, the woods were wild and people feared it. But when I listened to the water, I understood. The earth doesn't want to be conquered. It only wants to be protected. The water beneath us is memory. It carries every story that has ever lived. Sarah paused. Outside she could hear the faint murmur of a stream. It felt as though Margaret herself was speaking to her across time. Letter after letter told the same truth. Each generation had guarded Willow Creek, tending to its hidden waters, recording the signs of change, waiting for the next keeper to come of age. As the firelight dimmed, Sarah turned to the last page. There, beneath the drawing of the constellation Cassiopeia, were the words, "Under the stars, you will find the second door." She stepped outside. The night air wrapped around her like silk. Above her, the 5 stars of Cassiopeia glimmered like a crown. And deep among the willows, a faint blue light flickered, calling her forward. Sarah smiled, whispering to the wind, "I'm listening." And she followed the light into the trees. Sarah followed the pale blue light through the trees. The wind whispered like distant voices, guiding her forward. Every step she took made the lantern glow brighter, until she reached a moss-covered stone carved with old markings. In the center was the constellation Cassiopeia, 5 stars forming a W. When the lantern's light touched the stone, its surface trembled softly, glowing with lines of light that spread like veins into the ground. She knelt and placed her hand on the stone. Beneath it, she could feel warm water flowing, alive, steady, breathing. Eleanor's words echoed in her mind. Beneath the roots of the willow lies the heart of the forest. 3 streams meet there, north, east, and south. One heals, one preserves, and one warns. The glowing network beneath her feet pulsed with 3 colors, blue, green, and gold. She remembered the bedtime tales her grandmother used to tell, about women who could hear the rivers shift before a storm, who knew when the soil was thirsty. Now she understood. They weren't fairy tales. They were instructions, passed down through generations. The water hummed beneath her palm, and the stars above seemed to shimmer in response. Sky and earth reflected each other, the stars marking what the rivers remembered. Suddenly, the blue light turned golden. One path flickered faster, leading toward a second stone deeper in the woods, a stone with a narrow slit, just wide enough for a hand. Sarah rose, lantern in hand, and followed the glowing trail through the trees. The forest pulsed around her, and for the first time, she could feel her heart beat and the earth's beating as one. A week after discovering the hidden network, the peace around Willow Creek began to change. Engines growled in the distance, cutting through the morning quiet. When Sarah opened the door, 2 men in suits stood at the gate. One smiled too widely, the other carried a clipboard. "Ms. Blackwood, we're from Helios Development. You may not know, but this area falls within our new energy expansion zone. If you're willing to sign here, you'll receive a very generous compensation." Sarah glanced at the contract. "Are you planning to drill under Willow Creek?" "Not drill," the taller man said smoothly. "We prefer to call it harnessing underground potential, a win-win situation." The numbers were large, tempting. But as Sarah hesitated, the scent of wet soil rose with the wind, and in her mind, a quiet voice whispered, "You cannot sell what you are only meant to protect." She invited them inside. The cabin's light was dim, the air heavy with the scent of pine. The men shifted uneasily as the floor creaked beneath them. "Aren't you afraid to live here alone?" one asked. Sarah smiled softly. "If you listen carefully, you'll realize I'm not alone." They left soon after, uneasy and silent. Sarah knew this was only the beginning. That night, she sat by the window as moonlight brushed the stream. Headlights flickered once, then vanished into the trees. She held the lantern tight, and on the wall the firelight shaped her grandmother's face. Gentle, calm, smiling. "Don't be afraid, my child. When the water is threatened, the keepers will rise." Thunder rolled over the valley. The wind surged through the trees, and deep within the forest, the blue light flared once more. Brighter, urgent, alive. The rain began softly on the second night, then grew heavier, thunder rumbling behind the mountains. Sarah sat by the window, watching the forest twist in flashes of lightning. The willow trees seemed to move, not swayed by wind, but stirred awake. Headlights pierced the darkness. The Helios trucks were back, bringing drills, lights, and men with hard hats and cold smiles. They set up barriers near the creek, preparing to bore into the ground. Sarah stepped outside, lantern in hand, its flame glowing like a small, defiant star. "You can't touch this land," she shouted. One man smirked. "You can't stop progress, Miss Blackwood. This is business." But the moment the drill hit the soil, a deep roar rolled through the valley. The earth shuddered. Water surged up from the ground, glowing blue in the rain. The men stumbled back, terrified. Engines died, lights flickered, and the forest came alive, roots rising, branches bending as if to shield the water. Sarah stood in the downpour, her lantern flame merging with the storm's light. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was part of something vast. The forest's breath, the water's pulse, the earth's heartbeat. When the rain eased, the trucks were gone, swallowed by mud and silence. The air smelled of pine and renewal. Sarah lifted her face to the sky. The storm clouds broke, and through them shone the first light of dawn. At the edge of the creek, a small wooden box lay half buried in the mud, marked with the crescent symbol of her grandmother's key. Inside was an old map and a single note. "When you have witnessed the awakening, follow where the stars meet the forest. There you will find the keeper's final gift." Sarah closed the box, held it to her chest, and turned toward the rising sun. Morning light spilled across the valley like golden silk. Sarah followed the creek, the old map damp in her hand. The marks, Cassiopeia, the crescent moon, a red ink circle, guided her deeper into the woods, to a clearing where sunlight streamed through the willows. In the center stood a low stone carved with faint words, "For the keeper who listens." She knelt, pressed her palm against the stone. Warmth pulsed from beneath the earth. Soft blue light rose, wrapping around her fingers like breath. Her grandmother's voice echoed gently. "My child, the true inheritance is not in the land. It's in your heart. When you understand that, you'll know what the final gift means." Sarah closed her eyes. The sound of wind, water, and her own heartbeat became one. When she opened them again, a small wooden box had surfaced from the soil, wrapped in roots and light. Inside lay a single ivory seed and a note in Eleanor's handwriting. "Plant this when you are ready, not to keep the land, but to remember that love can always grow again." Tears mixed with rain as Sarah smiled. She dug a small hole by the creek, placed the seed inside, and covered it with her bare hands. The wind brushed past her, and from the earth, a fragile sprout reached toward the light. "I promise, Grandma," she whispered. "I'll keep it, for those who will come after me." When she returned to the cabin, sunlight poured through the window, illuminating Eleanor's portrait. Her smile seemed alive, peaceful, eternal. Sarah sat down, opened the old journal, and wrote on the last page, "Today, Willow Creek awoke again, not as a refuge, but as a promise." Outside, the stream whispered softly, and beneath the soil, the seed began to root. By the following spring, Willow Creek had changed. The forest was greener, the stream clearer, and the little cabin seemed to breathe with new life. On the creek's edge, where Sarah had planted the seed months ago, a young tree now stood. Its leaves glimmered with dew, its trunk faintly glowing under the morning sun. Locals began calling it Eleanor's tree. They said touching its bark brought calm, like hearing a melody you'd forgotten you loved. Sarah's life, too, had shifted. She opened small gatherings for local children, teaching them to read the sky, to listen to the water, to protect the woods, rather than fear them. People came to Willow Creek not to explore, but to remember how to belong. A local conservation group offered to fund an eco-learning sanctuary. Sarah only smiled and said, "I don't own this place. I just keep it, like my grandmother did." Silence followed, the kind that comes when truth lands softly but deeply. Seasons passed. The tree grew taller, its roots wrapping gently around the stones that marked the keeper's circle. One evening, Sarah sat on the porch watching the sunset spill across the valley. In her arms, her newborn slept, breathing in rhythm with the rustling willows. On the table beside her, Eleanor's old journal lay open. On the last page, a new line appeared in Sarah's handwriting. "Every generation has a forest to keep and someone to love." The wind carried the scent of herbs, and somewhere in the woods, the whisper of her grandmother's voice moved through the trees. Gentle, eternal, at peace. Years passed. Willow Creek had become a quiet sanctuary, a place where people came not to escape the world, but to remember they were part of it. The cabin still stood, humble and strong. The old oil lamp rested on the table, and though no one lit it any more, each night a faint blue glow flickered inside, as if the keepers still watched over the land. The children of the valley grew up knowing the song of Willow Creek. They said that on nights when the moon was full, you could hear a melody drifting through the trees, the sound of water, wind, and leaves weaving together like a lullaby from the earth itself. Some believed it was Eleanor's spirit. Others said it was Sarah, singing softly to her child. But those who had stood by the creek knew it was something deeper, a song that quieted the heart and made you feel whole again. At dusk, a little girl, Sarah's daughter, sat by the stream, humming that same tune, while the willows swayed in rhythm around her. Beneath the soil, the roots of Eleanor's tree stretched outward, touching the hidden veins of water, spreading life through every corner of the forest. The air shimmered softly, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire valley was breathing in harmony. When the first stars appeared above the trees, the melody rose again. Gentle, timeless, the song of a land that remembers love. The song of Willow Creek.